What about a pillar and buttress? Let's talk about that. We've heard sermons about, we've seen slides. John, brother? That's fine. I'll just give you time to think. Go ahead. Yes. 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 He circles. No, that's helpful. He circles back to what? What did Brother John mention? There's a key word there that is, John used the term core, which is a good word. It's the same idea. It conjures up in the mind the same idea of a theme of sound doctrine. Verse 10 of chapter 1, sound doctrine. Very important. So this pillar of the church holds up sound doctrine. That's how we behave. We have behaviors that point us towards sound doctrine. And it goes the other way. What's more important, which we will get to, is what does sound doctrine do to our behavior? How does that work? So yes, there's sound doctrine, very important part. Brother Norman, yes. Good, a very important point. It's actually a question that it's going to take us to a point, and the question is there a greater organization? Is there anything greater? And the answer is no, there is nothing greater. And that's what we're hopefully gaining from this study, is that there's concepts and ideas and principles that work. When we get to chapter 5 on how Paul really gets into and how to treat one another, those principles work. Those behaviors are helpful. It helps people to grow and to be built up. And the church is a pillar. It supports the truth. The buttress, architects in here will know what a buttress is. Even non-architects, we know what that is. That's the support. That support that goes from what is being held up, a platform or the roof. The buttress goes from the platform or the roof to the pillar. So the pillar and a buttress and the roof. All of this is holding up. So our behavior is going to migrate. We're always going to be migrating to sound doctrine. What does the Lord say about whatever issue? And how does the church, all of us, how do we hold up the truth? So very important. Another concept here, great indeed we confess, is the mystery of godliness. This mystery, Paul describes it as a mystery. He uses this term in verse 9 as well. They must hold the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience. The faith, this mystery of godliness, has been revealed. Is this something that we can do? That's going to be something that we're going to discuss as we move along. But godliness is part of this theme. Very important that there's sound doctrine, that we maintain that there's godliness. Sound doctrine without godliness, that's going to lead to a shipwreck. We need to maintain godliness. Then that raises a question, well, what is godliness? Really? You're godly? You could be godly? What is that about? Well, the Holy Spirit, Apostle Paul, is going to teach the church. He's going to teach us. And then there's works. So soundness, sound doctrine, godliness, and works. And then how is this mystery proven or validated? We look at the verbs in this text here in verse 16. Manifested, vindicated, seen, seen by angels, proclaimed, believed, and taken up. I don't have a better term other than a phrase, more valid. But that's a problematic term in that once something is valid, it's valid. It's either valid or it's invalid. But in day-to-day practice, we look for evidence, things that lend towards validity of something. If I say something is going to work and there's evidence to prove it, there's a little bit of evidence. So we think it's valid. We're still working on it. But the Holy Spirit is valid. This is, again, very important. This mystery of godliness manifested, vindicated, seen by angels, proclaimed, believed on, and taken up. Remember when Philip asked Jesus, show us the Father in John chapter 14, verses 9 and 10. Jesus, show us the Father. Remember what his answer was, the Lord's answer? Pardon? Thank you. Thank you. Give that man the mic. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So, what is godliness? Jesus talks about godliness in the rest of that chapter. And I know 14, 15, 16 of the Gospel of John is the promise of the Holy Spirit, the Helper, and that was to the disciples. I'm not talking about miracles. The apostles performed miracles, but there's still something in those chapters for us. But Brother Roy said, if Jesus' answer was, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Okay, so we look at what did Jesus do? I can't do miracles. Well, but what can we do? Do we just stop? We don't stop there. What can we do? So Apostle Paul is going to teach us about that. And we'll talk more. So the questions now. Okay to move on? Probably. Well, we need to move on, but go ahead. One more. Yes, absolutely. Yes. Good summary statement. If we do not follow the example of Jesus Christ, we are not going to be godly. A very important point. I don't think we can make that too clear. We have to follow the example of Jesus Christ. And that's what these passages in the letter, in both of these, or all three of these letters that Paul has written, it's going to keep coming up. Thank you for that. So we got started on the first chapter, or the first question, what is the most important work that can be done to make sure the church always has qualified elders and deacons? So none of these questions are meant to confuse or to trick anyone. That's not what I'm after here. The questions, though, will have different answers, and there's some risk in that because we don't want to have a discussion that's disorder. We're not behaving, and there's disorder. But it's to open up discussion. What does it look like? What is an important work that any of us can do to help make sure the church always has qualified elders and deacons? So the risk is that we'll each probably have a different answer. And that's okay as long as it's book, chapter, and verse to support it. An example of that is the comment Wednesday night, Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21, that we submit to one another. Well, that's a good aim. That's helpful. If it's unsound doctrine, then it's difficult to you can't submit to unsound doctrine. But there's other ways that we submit to dealing with perhaps unsound doctrine if there's an attempt to teach it. So what did you come up with? Any volunteers that want to? Yes, John? Yeah. there's a lot there. It includes the roles of the wives or mothers, the children. So thank you. I guess we do think along. You are thinking along with me. So thank you for that. But that's what the text will bear out, that if we are thinking this way, then it's going to lead to building up of the church, to the development of those roles. What else did you come up with? Zach? Good, yeah. So our brother points out that the importance of teaching our children, very important point. It's not going to just all of a sudden, like a light switch, turn on, that a young woman grows up, I want my husband to be an elder, or there's other roles. We've just finished chapter 3, elders and deacons, and that's why I mentioned that. There's a lot of things to be done to help carry on the Lord's work. What else did you come up with? That's a good point. How about moving on to the second one here and start to fold in this discussion, because this is, I thought, would be a helpful discussion to have, is what we are hearing here. So what is the most meaningful action then that I can do to help grow the church? So we can talk about what men should do, what parents should do, what children should do, what mothers should do, what wives should do. Maybe there are women who do not have children. So what can I do? And this, maybe you're not comfortable sharing this, but a couple hands have already went up. So I'll start on the back and work forward. Sister, go ahead. Donna. Yes. So be a good listener. To validate when we listen to, how do you feel when someone repeats back what you have just said in their presence? How does that make you feel? How does that make you feel, Donna, when it makes you feel validated? Good. Yes, to take, our wife one day said, we're going to start a 3-second rule. And I don't know what started that thought in her mind, but I thought it was a good thing to do. 3 seconds, 3-second rule. When this is when the children were, there's a lot going on, so there's 4 people at the table. 3-second rule. Before you answer or before you speak, count to 3 from the point when the person before you stopped speaking. 1, 2, 3. See, we have to digest those words. What did they think? And then repeat them back. So enough of that. We don't want to. It's a very good point. I wanted to spend a little bit more time on that because that is critical. It's not an easy thing to do. Brother Roy? Yeah. So you're describing, our brother's describing an example. Sometimes it's a full-time job to get to services and to be at services and encourage the other person. There's just a lot of different circumstances in people's lives, and perhaps it's merely the example. So listening to our brother here, the first passage that comes to my mind is 1 Peter chapter 3 in wives. So first, I'll just read it quickly here. Likewise, 1 Peter chapter 3 verse 1, likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of the wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Respectful and pure conduct is powerful. And she didn't even say a word. Very important, just our example. Good. So moving, good comments here. Appreciate that. So there's things that each one of us can do. I think we get the point there. But now, what is the third one? What is my aim and goal in life? So it's going to be different in each decade or period in your life of what your goal is. But what is my aim and goal in life, and how will my aim affect my thoughts, words, and actions? So this isn't meant to be a psychology class, or even though it's difficult to get away from that, because that's really what a lot of this is our thinking. The intent behind the question there is not really to teach you anything, because we already know these things. We already know that the things that we think about affect what we do. And what I'm after here is, like 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 3, Apostle Peter wrote that second letter. He says, I write these things up to stir up your pure minds. So Peter reminded us. So this is a reminder for us. It's like that. How does this question, what do you think of? What did you come up with? Logan. Okay, so if I may summarize your point, an excellent point. To one of the main aspects of your comment, at least what I hear, if I may summarize that, is to see each situation through a lens of love, how our Lord would look at problems and in situations. And not an easy thing to do during difficult situations. There's a whole myriad of different situations, and to maintain this aspect of love when you're being mistreated or when, there's so many different situations, but to put that into practice, and it takes us back to Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 16, that we, as we're about our daily lives and we leave the sheepfold here, that we are still a joint that supplies input. It supplies the body from Ephesians 4:16 so that we build up one another, so that the church is built up in love. That we need to keep that in mind. So one more comment, and then we're going to transition to chapter 4. But we want to hear what Jay has to say. The right path, yeah. And if that's great what our brother is doing here. He's going to the text. And how do I let the Lord direct my life we keep in mind from Proverbs chapter 3 and verses 3 through 6 that we are on a path. Even if we're not thinking about being on a path, we are always on a path, and we want to stay on the Lord's path. And Hebrews chapter 13 is an excellent place to go to get built up so that we can put those things into practice. Just to summarize the questions here, hopefully that is helpful for you. So I have scriptures to support kind of where my mind was when I was writing these questions as I'm going through the text here. In question 1, it's about culture. I think someone mentioned culture. It's how do we, these teaching our children so that it's not just going to be a light bulb that goes on or a switch that turns on one day when they're full grown, but it's a culture. It's a culture in the home. The culture in the home is teaching the children. And then the importance of appointing elders and deacons. Paul and Barnabas, Paul was stoned, left for dead, and went back to Lystra and Iconium and Antioch to appoint elders in the churches. So that he must have thought that was important. Acts chapter 14, 19 through verse 23. In Titus chapter 1 and verse 5, Paul appointed Titus, left him on Crete for that very task. Question 2, I mentioned Ephesians chapter 4, verses 13 and 16. There's something for everyone to help build up this culture. We might say, well, I will never be an elder. I will never be a deacon. For whatever reason, say there's a valid reason. But we don't stop there. Okay, what can I do? What can I do to help the church? And then that's in the third question. The third question, last quarter we heard mentioned, and I think properly so, the deep brain. There's just the parts of things that we memorize that we let sink down deep into our brain that starts to form our values, and where we start to filter what is going to be valuable to us. So that's how we set a goal based on that. And then the words and the actions are, that's actually the temporal lobe. That's the frontal lobe. That's what we execute. The things in the deep brain, the things that we dream about, that we hold very dear to our heart, then is going to come out in our actions, in our words, and in our behaviors. We know that's what I think how that works. If we're not going through that process, what do you have? What is it to not go through that process? What do you call that action? Before we start reading in verse 1 of chapter 4. That's called an impulse, right? We're not thinking it through. We just act. We just behave in a certain way. That's an impulse. When I buy something that's not on the list at the checkout stand, that's the impulse buying in a very simple, straightforward example, right? Can be very severe consequences to impulses, though. So we create a culture with our children and our home. So before I read, we have time for a brief comment, and then we are going to read these 5 verses, because I promised as a teacher to keep the cadence. But we want to hear what you have to say. To love one another, we love our brothers and sisters, but we love our neighbor as ourselves. That it has to be taken to that next level. And that becomes a core value that then affects our behaviors. If that value is very deeply ingrained in our minds, it's going to affect how we treat other people, regardless of a lot of different circumstances. As I read, actually we'd like a volunteer to read. We're going to have to pick up, or we just need to pick up the pace a little bit. Not that there's anything wrong with the pace that we've been doing. We're just modulating here. So we're going to adjust a little bit. A very helpful discussion, and thank you for this. Could I have a volunteer to read verses 1 through 5 of chapter 4? Steve. Thank you. So in that reading, what stands out to you the most? Based on our discussion and what we've read in the first 3 chapters of this letter, now why, okay, the mystery of godliness has been validated. Now why would Paul say this? Why is he saying what he is saying, and how can we apply it? Let's just take the first part of that. What's the why here? Any volunteers on that? Brother Roy? Okay, there we go. Thank you. Well, there's time efficiency right there. So we are being instructed. Timothy is told that if he is delayed, these things are written so that you know how to behave in the household of God. So the whole church knows how. And to our brother's point, not everyone's going to do that. So now he's going to say some things. Thank you. So now is the how. How do people do this? In the few minutes that we have left here, and as you're studying, think about, or at least one of the things in addition to what strikes you, which we can pick up on Wednesday night, in addition to that, please if you're not already inclined to do so, pay very close attention to this word seared. It has to do with conscience in verse 2. Their consciences are seared. How does this happen? Well, their consciences are seared. So we read in verse 5 that we want a pure heart. It's love. It's love that exudes from a pure heart, a good conscience, and a sincere faith. All of that's connected. Biologically, all of that is connected. Physiologically, we cannot not do any one of those three. Pure heart, a good conscience, and sincere faith. When we swerve from one of those, we are at risk of what happened to Alexander and Hymenaeus. A little swerve can end up into shipwreck or crash. So what is seared? It's actually, I wanted to spend a few minutes on this because it's actually a very strong word, which probably already is obvious to you. So with a seared conscience, they forbid marriage, require abstinence from foods that God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. My wife and I came from a religious background that and some of you, probably several of you, came from that kind of a background. There were foods that we were commanded. It's the religious aspect. So this is not even the Jewish religion, what a lot of the church members were coming out of. Something that was being taught in our day. So this word seared, actually, the Greek definition is cauterization. Unless it's something that you already do, you're probably not real familiar with the term cauterization. It doesn't have a very pleasant sound, but a cauterization is something. What it does, it's actually in the medical field, it is heat. It's very intense heat applied to tissue to stop bleeding. And it's very effective. So with small blood vessels that start to bleed during surgery, that gets cauterized because you don't want that going on. So you cauterize it. It's done. It's done bleeding. It's not going to bleed anymore. It means the same thing as I grew up on a dairy, and some of the cattle that we purchased, there's probably livestock owners in here, you've seen brands, or you've at least, if you do not own livestock, you've at least seen a picture of a brand. Up close on livestock, that brand, that skin, I'm not going to say that there are sins that are irreversible. That's a whole different class and a different discussion. But to reverse the effects of cauterized skin on livestock, it'll never happen. It's changed permanently. It's very tough, very thick. Instantly, it's cauterized with heat. But this is something that, how do people teach this? Or is their conscience just all of a sudden just seared? So, no, it's a real gradual process. That's why we don't want to swerve, because the devil is very sneaky that way. He can do a very slow cauterization. I'll probably just stop with that because that's enough on cauterization. I think we get the point with that. But I just wanted to spend a few minutes on that. And then this leaves us set up for what we are going to further read about, so that we are not caught up in having our consciences seared. And how do we treat with love individuals that are maybe teaching unsound doctrine? That requires training. Godliness is going to come up again. And Apostle Paul is going to use this term, value. He uses it 3 times in these letters, and it's translated value, profitable, or of profit. That's something to think about as we read and study. Any last comments or any? We have a couple. We have a couple minutes here. So this doesn't have to be a 30-second comment. You can organize your thoughts. If there's anything I said that doesn't agree with you very well, doesn't sit very well for you, if it's egregious, take me aside afterwards. You probably don't want to let it loose in the class. I don't think I've said anything egregious, though. But John? That's good. It is striking. What our brother has pointed out, for those perhaps if you did not hear, was how just the importance of giving thanks for what God has given us. Give thanks for the foods and just everything that God has given us. Specifically here, what is under consideration is what the food that we eat, but then in verse 4, everything that is created. We have a whole lot better feeling in our disposition when we give thanks to God for things. Even if it's something that doesn't feel unloving or something that we're not sure how this is going to turn out to be a blessing, but we're going to pray to God and we're going to give thanks to God for what He has given us. Well, great place to end. I'm thankful for your comments. I'm grateful for your presence here this morning. It's been very encouraging. Hopefully it has been for you as well. So we will be ready Wednesday night, if you would, to pick up in on verse 6 of chapter 4 of 1 Timothy. Thank you.